Thank you, Yaman, and good morning, everybody. So my name is Fahd Batayneh. I work for ICANN. I actually cover the Middle East region, along with a colleague of mine who comes by the name of Bahar Asmat. He's the vice president of the region. So as many of you might know, actually ICANN is involved in domain names, IP addresses, and protocol parameters. And really our main focus is on domain names, because when it comes to IP addresses, that's the work of the regional internet registries. And when it comes to protocol parameters, that's really the work of IETF. We are always in agreement. I mean, even when before we commissioned the study, we were 100% sure that actually the DNS industry in this region, and I'll define this region to you in a while, is really underutilized. And there is a lot of potential for growth, a lot of potential for innovation. And as many of you know, actually, in the last 10 years, most of the innovations that have happened around the world, or most of the breakthroughs that have happened around the world, were as a result actually of the internet. So Facebook, Twitter, and all these new platforms that are coming up, I mean, all rely on the internet in one way or another. And domain names is actually a way of branding those products and services that are provided. So defining the region that the study covers, it's really the 22 Arab states, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Turkey. And this region is actually branded as the Middle East and adjoining countries, or in short, MEAC. So I'll be using the term MEAC actually wherever it is mentioned on my slides. And so the study actually, the goal of the study was to identify the strength and weaknesses in the domain name industry in this region, and then develop recommendations on how to advance the industry. So ICANN commissioned what was called the URID consortium to do the study, and it consisted of URID, who is the CCTLD operator for .eu, the European Union. We also had on board OXIL, which is Oxford Information Labs, and they do a lot of big data mining and analysis. Emily Taylor Consultancy, and she was actually the lead author on this report. And then we also had local flavor in the form of Abu Ghazala Intellectual Property. And these four entities combined were named as the URID consortium. And I've provided some extra details in there for you to read, due to lack of time. So the methodology really consisted of surveys and desk work. And when we talk about surveys, it was surveys to registries, surveys with registrars, and surveys with registrants. Now, in terms of registries, 12 countries were, we focused on 12 countries. And actually, Turkey was one of those countries that we zoomed in on. Now, in terms of registrars, 30 registrars were actually interviewed, and not all of them actually were ICANN accredited registrars. So we had actually a mix of accredited and non-accredited registrars. When it came to registrants, we surveyed 700 users from 15 different countries. And actually, going back to registrars, some registrars were actually surveyed from outside of the region, like in Europe and North America. And of course, when it came to desk-based research, the researchers mined out information on how things look in the domain name industry, digging into domain name zone files, who is privacy, proxy servers, and premium names, and the like. In terms of quantitative analysis, so some of the information were extracted from domain name zone files, especially those that actually provide open access to them. They contacted CCTLDs to obtain information about registration and registrars and numbers and etc. Privacy and proxy registrations, and that is who is. And of course, premium domain names, and then the main keywords that are registered within the region. So some findings. Now, before we go into the specific findings of the industry, one thing we have to look at is that it's a really diverse region. So the smallest country in the region in terms of population is Qatar, 2 million people almost. And then the largest country in the region is Pakistan, 182 million inhabitants. So there is a diversity in terms of population number. In terms of GDP per capita, again, it's diverse from 659 US dollars per year for Afghanistan to $97,000 in Qatar. Literacy rates range from 32% in Afghanistan to 100% in Lebanon. Linguistic and cultural homogeneity varies from like low in the in let's say most of the Gulf countries due to the expats, to high in countries like Iran and Turkey, where they focus a lot on using their local language and implementing their local cultures. Internet penetration, for example, ranges from 6% in Afghanistan to 88% in the United Arab Emirates. Low number of internet exchange points, and I understand that there was an IXP workshop 2 days ago to maybe kind of change things in the region. In terms of costs of broadband connectivity, it's much more expensive in this region compared to overseas. So I come from Jordan, and I actually have a broadband connectivity of 2 to 8 megabits per second. I pay like $45 per month. I stayed in the United States back in 2005, 2006, and I had a broadband connectivity of 3 megabits per second, and that cost me $26. That was 10 years ago. So it's obvious that there's a lot more to be done when it comes to broadband and pricing and all that and all the like. So here I'll be sharing with you like some really quick statistics, and I understand that we're running behind time. So 71% of the websites that originate from the region have content in English. And actually the global average is 55%. So it's obvious that English has a higher preference in the region. 31% of people actually use the internet less than 3 hours per day. In terms of hosting, 5% of the most well-known websites in the region are hosted within the region. And I believe Jim Cowie actually has a presentation on hosting trends in the region, and I'm sure, he'll explain to you more why that is the case in the region. In terms of language, there are 3 main languages in the region: Arabic, English, and French. Of course, if you go to the Gulf, there is a large expat community who speak probably Hindi and Urdu. In terms of the market, so when we look at registrars, so the region doesn't have a large number of registrars. I think it's like 17 registrars actually from the region, while overall there are more than 2,500 ICANN accredited registrars, and of course the 17 are all ICANN accredited registrars, and then actually the majority of them have a lot of problems when it comes to operations, and they have low numbers of domain names under management. I think the only exception is in Turkey. So of the 17, actually 8 exist here in Turkey, and 4 of them are really big players. Registrars complain lack of interaction with the registry. So I'm not saying that this is bad, but the majority of CCTLD registries, for example, in the region are run by governments. Some do an excellent job, like in the United Arab Emirates, but many others actually are not doing quite well, due to probably, in some cases, due to the governmental bureaucracy of registering these domain names. Hosting. So, when we as registrants want to purchase a domain name, it's not just about buying the domain name. We are looking at services that go behind it: web hosting, email hosting, search engine optimization, SSL certificates. You can name it. And usually when you talk to registrars, they would, most of their servers, if not all, are actually hosted overseas. So they just co-locate space somewhere in a data center, probably in Germany or the US or Canada, and those are their systems. I think one of the only few countries in the region that have a good model when it comes to hosting is the United Arab Emirates. Though broadband and internet connectivity is extremely expensive, But of course, I mean, speaking to some of the registrars in the United Arab Emirates, I mean, some people who actually host content, especially governments, prefer to have their content locally. And actually, at the moment, it's a trend between within many governments in the region to have their content hosted locally. In terms of registrant market, I mean, registrants sometimes complain that they're unable to reach to a CCTLD. In many cases, CCTLDs don't have a proper supply chain. In other words, they would sell domain names directly. They wouldn't have let's say, a supply chain of registrars who actually can sell a domain name and services. I used to work for .jo, which is the CCTLD of Jordan, and people used to come and buy domain names from us. And then they would ask us the next question, what do I do with this domain name? So we would actually have to point them to entities that actually can host the domain name for them. That is a problem. I mean, for many people, it's easier to just have a one-stop shop. Buy a domain name, buy hosting services, whether web hosting, email hosting, and that's it. Like within 5 minutes, you are up and running, and of course, you receive one bill or one invoice every year. I mean, in many cases, registrants also don't know who are their registrar. I mean, because they would have outsourced to some programming company or web hosting company who just does the job for them. Branding is another issue, so many people actually just choose random names while in the domain name industry, and when it comes to search engine optimization and other services that make you actually more visible, it is always advised that you follow some kind of a mechanism in choosing domain names. So some quick numbers in the region. The region has 2.9 million domain names. And that is actually a mixture of CCTLD registrations and GTLD registrations. According to VeriSign's latest quarterly report, the world has almost 300 million domain names. So the 2.9 million roughly translates to 1% of the domain names registered. And actually the region has a 220 million internet population, and the world has like almost 3.3 billion. So you're talking about 6.5 to 7% of internet users worldwide come from this region. But then in terms of domain name registration, it's only 1%. So it's obvious that we're lagging a lot behind. But the positive sign is that 20%, I mean, the growth in terms of domain names currently stands at 20% per year. I think it goes down to the fact that many of the TLDs or CCTLDs in the region actually rolled out their IDNs just recently. And even though it didn't contribute much to the increase in domain names, I mean, it did contribute to some significant improvement in the total number. In terms of IDNs, the region has 21,000 IDNs, and actually half of them are registered here in Turkey. So the Turkish language actually has, I think, 6 characters that are, I mean, special to them. Now, in terms of registries, I guess many of the registries have policies that really need to be freed and liberalized. I think they need to also create some kind of a dialogue channel with registrars and registrants, because at the end of the day, they're selling their services to registrants through sales channels. Many of the registrars don't believe in innovation and supporting SMEs. I know, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, they actually, the CCTLD, which is actually run by the government, and it's one of the best examples in the region actually, they actually have a fund to support SMEs and entrepreneurs to actually get more involved in the business, and they have already supported. I mean, I'm aware of one reseller who's really doing good in the country. This graph actually shows domain name registrations per country in the region. So as you can see, Turkey has 1.3 million domain name registrations, and I'll share with you more information about Turkey in the coming slides. Iran comes at number 2, so Iran has around, well, I mean, the CCTLD in Iran has 770,000 registrations. And of course, I mean, Iran just got out of the sanctions recently, but before that, Iranians couldn't buy domain names from overseas because they didn't have, I mean, most of them didn't have credit cards to actually make online payments. So the majority of the registrations in Iran, I mean, more than 80 or 90%, are actually under .ir, which is the largest CCTLD in the region. And then, of course, at number 3 comes Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and I think Morocco comes at number 4, Tunisia at number 5, and then the rest have registrations of less than 10,000 domain names. So zooming in on Turkey. So Turkey has a population of roughly 79 million inhabitants. 45 million of them are online, and that is 57%. Now, the average number of internet users who access the internet worldwide is 45%, so it's obvious that Turkey is ahead. Has a GDP per capita of $20,000 US. The CCTLD is .tr. Literacy rate is 90%. And of course, it has a high linguistic and cultural homogeneity. Okay. Seems that it's dead. Okay, the internet industry. Now, as I explained earlier, Turkey has the second largest CCTLD in the region after .ir in Iran. So they are approaching actually the 400,000 registrations mark. But looking at domain names overall, there are these are approximate numbers. We wouldn't say that they are exact numbers, but they give like an overview of how things look like, really. In terms of all domain names, domain names registered across all TLDs, it sums up to 1.3 million domain name registrations, and that includes, of course, .tr. The most famous TLDs where domain names are registered in Turkey includes .tr, .com, and .tk. Probably many of you know that .tk actually is the largest CCTLD in the world, 30 million registrations. It's for a small island called, I can't pronounce the name properly. But of course, and the reason is that it's not just because they offer free domain names under .tk. We were told actually that TK is closer to Turkey than .tr. It's not in terms of the registry, it's just that TK is more closer to Turkey. I don't know, they prefer to register under .tk. If we compare the number of domain names registered for the entire, compared to versus the entire population, it's 1.67%. So for every 100 Turks, there is 1.67 domain names registered. 12% of the domain names are actually under private whois or proxy whois, so it's hidden. Of course, they have the largest IDN CCTLD market in the region with 11,000 domain names registered under .tr. As I mentioned earlier, they have 8 ICANN accredited registrars. And of course, 2 of the new GTLD applications came from Turkey, and that was .ist and .Istanbul. And probably they have, I have seen some ads of these 2 TLDs around Istanbul. They have a very strong hosting market. I know half of the registrars who actually are ICANN accredited registrars and providing hosting services. They have some amazing operations, and not all their operations are actually within Turkey. So they also do have operations overseas, like in Cyprus and Greece and some of the STAN countries. More than 50% of the popular sites are actually hosted in Turkey, versus, of course, the 5% average of the region. And that's tenfold, that's a good number. Approximately 755 websites are hosted in the country, with 67% of them actually having content, and 33% of them are parked. 48% of the web content is in the Turkish language, and that's versus the 71% in English across the region. There are more than 4,000 new GTLD registrations in Turkey, and that sums up to almost 90% of all new GTLD registrations in the region. So it's obvious that there is high awareness in terms of new GTLDs. And of course, registrations are under almost 190 different new GTLDs. So in terms of conclusion and recommendations, I'll really run quickly so that through these slides. and it's self-explanatory, and you can actually find the slides online. So in conclusion, I mean, it's a large region in terms of geography. It's a very diverse region. I mean, we ran some statistics on population, country size. There's a large number of expats. As I mentioned, an underutilized domain name industry, issues with registries, issues with CCTLDs. Registrars are facing some problems as a consequence. When it comes to registrants, many people think that the internet is Facebook, and this is one thing I didn't mention. And many people prefer to have like presence on Facebook maybe. Some folks who actually open small businesses and try to market their products, they think that actually having presence on Facebook versus having an online presence on a website is a good option. Of course, it doesn't work in most cases, and so people tend to change that behavior. In terms of recommendations, really, I mean, I think all players within the region have a role in improving things. So CCTLDs kind of have to liberalize their policies. They have to start talking more to registrars and registrants. There should be some better marketing, better awareness on how to actually register a good domain name that could actually be visible. Encourage maybe the establishment of a registrar model, implementation of EPP for those who actually understand the technical background of a proper registry system. Of course, there are issues that actually need the involvement of the global internet community, and one good example is the utilization of internationalized domain names, or IDNs, where, I mean, there are many issues related to universal acceptance, which actually needs resolutions. This is a link to the study. It's a big study, actually. I think it's like 180 pages, 150 pages of text and graphs, and 30 pages of appendix. Honestly speaking, I read the draft of it. I haven't had the chance to read the final version of it. It was just released exactly 1 month ago. So this is the link. If you're interested in reading the study, I'd really encourage you to do that. And that's it for me, really. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And I'll just show the slides of the link so in case anybody's interested. Questions?
Good. Questions, please?
I don't know. I mean, usually when there are no questions, it could either mean that I did a good job in presenting, or it means that my presentation was boring. I hope it's the former. No questions?
All right. Okay. If there are no more questions, no questions. Okay. Thank you very much, Fahd. Our next presenter will be Jim Cowie, who will actually talk about local hosting in the Middle East. So please welcome Jim to the stage.
All right, hi everybody, good morning. I'm Jim Cowie. I'm one of the founders at Deep Macro, which, if you haven't heard of it, is my new experiment. We're studying macroeconomic trends that affect the G20 and emerging markets countries using a range of different data sets, which includes the internet infrastructure data that we all love. Today, I'm actually going to talk about perhaps the final presentation in a year-long sequence that we've been doing on local hosting. So local hosting is the process that actually it follows very naturally from Fahd's talk of having a healthy local hosting industry that can support the websites and other content that's behind all of these domain names. So what we're doing today is taking a look with some data that was provided by my colleagues at Dyn Research, where we analyze local and remote hosting using a new technique. Previously, in the last year or so, I've done this using Alexa data, which has its own limitations because Alexa is not automatically a good proxy for what's really important in a country. I've also done it using CCTLD data directly, where we were able to get complete zone files, but that's difficult. Sometimes you can get the zone files, often you can't. It's hard to get a really global survey because there are hundreds of countries you would have to survey. So today what we've done is we're taking a passive DNS data set, which includes information on the domains that were actually looked up in the last 12 months in a recursive resolver environment for all the countries on Earth, for all the CCTLDs. And so I just have to pause and thank my former colleagues at Dyn Research, an internet performance company that also does a authoritative and secondary DNS business for CCTLDs. So I appreciate their help getting me this data. Here's what we did. We took this passive DNS data set. We reconstructed zone files for each CCTLD on Earth, counting the popular domains. We abstracted all of the FQDNs to the second and third level zones that they came from, and then we simply took the A records for the apex domains in those zones for every country to figure out the fraction that were hosted in the country or the fraction that were hosted somewhere else. So it's a surprisingly direct technique. I like this technique. Of course, it has its biases, but they may be useful biases. We don't count parked domains, we don't count dead domains. There are a lot of domains that are in zone files that have been there forever that don't necessarily get used by people. So in this data set, these are things that actually got used by people. We did 234 CCTLD studies at once, and today I will pull out about 5 of them for special attention. So I'll do a lot of these kinds of scatter plots, and I picked 2 dimensions to organize countries. Here, every country is a dot, and I've tried to pack as much as I can in here. The size of the dot represents the population size, log scale. So the enormous dots you see there are China and India, for example. The color will vary. In this case, it's by subregion. So pink is East Asia, orange is South Asia, purple is Africa, and so forth. So the 2 dimensions I've picked here are 2 that I thought initially might be economic dimensions that might help explain local hosting. So the vertical axis is log scale direct foreign investment. How many dollars do people put into every national economy from outside? Could plausibly correlate with the growth of the local hosting industry. The x-axis is GDP per person, purchasing parity adjusted. So something reflecting kind of the personal wealth or the personal buying power of an average citizen, just dividing GDP by people, and it's expressed in international dollars. Okay, so now we've got the space oriented for this plot at least. I apologize if you are red-green colorblind. I'm about to turn it red for places that export all of their content to have somebody else host it, and green if you're able to hold on to a significant percentage in your own country. Okay, so pretty quickly you can see that there are 2 different classes here of countries. On the left and down are the countries with lower GDP per person. On the right, countries with more GDP. That seems to be the primary divider. You could almost draw a line here to divide this into 2 clusters at about $8,000 annually per person GDP, purchasing parity adjusted. Foreign direct investment turns out not to be a very good distinction. Perhaps that's because foreign direct investment can take a lot of different forms, including steel mills and things that really don't have any bearing on the information economy per se. So if we roll forwards and take a look at a different set of axes, maybe we can find a way to cluster this that makes more sense intuitively. So let's get rid of the dollar economics. Let's talk about internet economies. So here we have 2 dimensions. The vertical dimension is how many zones did we see in the CCTLD in this data set. So bigger places with more domain names are up top. On the x-axis, we have how many domestic autonomous systems are in the country, counting people who have at least 80% of their customer base as measured in the routing table in the country. And you can see that these two are very strongly correlated.